All right? Joshua chapter 24 and verse number 14. Joshua chapter 24, verse number 14. Please, give me your attention just for a few minutes as we hear God's Word. Verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord, and serve Him in sincerity and in truth. And put away the gods, little g, that's false gods and idols. Anything in your life that's a false god or an idol, He said, put it away. Which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve ye the Lord. And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose ye this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua did not say, as for me, I'm going to try to live right. He did not say, as for me, I'm going to live right. He said, as for me and my house, we're not going to try. We're not going to do the best we can. We will serve the Lord. That's a strong statement. Ladies and gentlemen, I preach this morning on the subject, the main duty of every father. The main duty of every father. If you're a father in here this morning, this is your main job. Joshua did not say, as for me and my house, we're going to be smart. Joshua did not say, as for me and my house, we're all going to get an education. Joshua did not say, as for me and my house, we're all going to get good jobs and make a lot of money. He didn't say that. He did not say, as for me and my house, we're all going to get famous and popular and be on TV. He said, for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua believed that that was the most important thing he could do for his family and household, was to get them to serve the Lord. Now, briefly, you understand, when a man says, as for me and my house, I've had people ask me, what does that mean, my house? And in the Bible, in Bible word terminology, your house means your immediate family and everybody who's living under your roof, eating your food, eating at your table, sleeping in the beds, and living in your home. If it's a cousin, one of the kids' cousins from out of town, if it's mamaw, if it's somebody that's just come to live with you, a relative or something, they are under your roof and are considered in the Bible your house. If a kid runs away and rebels and goes out there and lives out somewhere, they're not in your house anymore. That's why he didn't say family, his house. His house. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The main duty of every father. Now I'm going to start at the last point and go backwards a little bit this morning and then start all over. Here's what the man was saying. Let me show you something, people. If that wall right over there was the beginning of your life, and that wall right there started you off at zero, and you lived, let's say you lived 75 or 80 years. Most of you won't, but let's just say you do. That would be that long right there. Let's just say 75 years. Work, play, making a living, getting married, getting a job, having fun, sports, eating, everything. 75 years. All right? Having everything you want down here. Then you die after 75 years. You started right here. Start right here and go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, all the way to that wall, all the way to that wall, and all the way to that wall, forever and ever and ever. That's eternity. Now, if you're only going to be here 75 years, and then it don't matter. Look, which is the most important? Getting rich, getting popular, getting famous, having a lot of money down here, and then forever and ever and ever in hell? Or which have served the Lord here and forever and ever in heaven? Well, I mean, it don't take a genius to figure out what's the most important. So, you know what the most important thing every father in here can do? Is to make absolute 100% sure that all your family is going to be over here in heaven someday. That's it. You can't do anything better than that. A daddy who's smart will say, my main job is to make sure everybody in my house is saved and on the way there. Now, it's okay to make a good living, be smart, pretty, talented, genius, make a lot of money. That's fine. But if you neglect eternity and they're not saved, then you've wasted your time and it's been in vain, and you wasn't a good daddy. Daddies, I challenge you today to make sure your whole family will be in heaven. Now, I want to say 3 things about it. The Lord put this on my heart the other day when I was studying and praying about this, and I want to say 3 things about the main job that you've got as a father. Number 1, the main job that any daddy in here has today is to be right with God Himself. To be right with God yourself. You know what your main job is, Daddy? To be right with God yourself. We got too many daddies today that give the old philosophies. Or the little girl says, Daddy, you going to church today? No, I'm not. You go on. We got too many daddies that have the philosophy of, don't do as I do, do as I say do. And the best thing a man can do first is be right with God Himself. There's a little girl one time, her daddy tried to get her to go to church, or she tried to get her daddy to go to church, and he tried to get her to go to church. Well, when she was little, she was always saying, Daddy, go to church. Daddy, go to Sunday school with me. And he said, I'm busy. I've worked all week. I'm going fishing. And next Sunday, little girl, she'd say, Daddy, please go to church with me. Daddy, please go to church with me. He said, honey, I've worked all week. I'm tired. This is the only day I got off. Go on to Sunday school. And she went in. Years went by. And as time went by, that girl grew up and got out in the world. And as time went by, he started getting older and gray and getting time where he started taking eternal things seriously. And he started, man, I need to get my heart right with God. And he got right with God and started going to church. And his girl was out in sin. And he called her and he said, honey, please go to Sunday school. Please go with me. She said, Daddy, I was out all night last night. I was out partying. I'm not going today. See how that thing turned around? You know what the best thing that man could have done is be right with God Himself. I challenge every man in here this morning, the best thing you can possibly do is be right with God yourself. Be right with God yourself. I heard about a man, this is a true story, who wanted money, and he hired a hitman to run over his 9-year-old daughter and kill her with a car so he could collect $70,000 insurance. And he took him out by the hand like this, and it was all planned out. Coming down the road at a certain time, walking down the road with that little girl, and that car come off the road, run over her and killed her so he could collect $70,000. You sit here this morning, you say that's awful. They ought to put a man like that under the jail. Man would let for money would let a car run over his little daughter. And yet there's men all over this country that are letting their daughters just run wild. Let them go out with any old boy that comes in the driveway. Let them hang around with people. Let them listen to music. Let them watch stuff on TV that ain't fit for their dog to see. And I'm telling you, you're giving your daughter to the devil. You better be right with God yourself. Hey, some of you men, hey, you're 30, you're 40, you're 50. Don't you think it's about time to man up a little bit and put your toys away and quit laying all day on the couch playing video games and be a man and be what your family needs for God? Be right with God yourself. Be right with God yourself. He said one time, this little girl, it was a real dark night, and her and her daddy was walking home, and it was real scary, and the wind's blowing, and it was thundering and lightning and everything, and he had hold of her hand like that. She said, Daddy, are you scared? He said, no, I'm not scared. And she said, well, if you're not, I'm not. And it calmed that little girl. That's why kids need a daddy. That's why kids need a daddy. If you're all right, then Daddy, I'm all right. Ladies and gentlemen, it takes a real man to step out of the altar and come down to the church and get right with God. It takes a man that'll stand up and say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I'm saying be right with God Himself. Number 2, I want to say the duty of a father is, number 2, to be an example to the family. Now, I'm going to give you some statistics this morning that'll shock you. But I want you to listen really careful to them. Statistics say, they just came out with these not long ago, I'm going to talk about fatherless homes. A home where there is no father in the home. Listen to this. First of all, 63% of suicides of young people come from a fatherless home. 71% of all teenage girls who get pregnant while they're a teenager come from a home where there's no daddy in the home. 70% of the juveniles in state-run facilities come from a home where there's no father in the home. 85% of kids that have behavioral disorders come from a home where the father is not present. 80% of young people who commit rapes come from a home where there's no daddy in that home. 71% of high school dropouts come from a home where there's no daddy in the home. 75% of drug abusers come from a home where there's no daddy in the home. And 85% of the youth in juvenile youth prisons today comes from a home where there's no daddy. No father figure. No male in the house. Nobody to set their foot down and say, me, mama, boys, girls, we will serve the Lord. I'm telling you something, men. It's time to be an example for our kids. The big need in our homes today is for daddies to stand up and say, follow me. Follow me. Live so that when people tell your son that he reminds them of you, that he will stick out his chest instead of his tongue. That's what somebody said. Now, I'm going to tell you this morning, ladies and gentlemen, you are to be an example in the home. I heard about a man one time. I read this story, and this man was a Christian man, supposedly. And this dog come into their yard, and his two boys really, really liked this dog. And they knew it belonged to somebody, but it was like a German Shepherd or something, and it was all dark brown or black, and it had 3 big, just white hairs on his tail. And they got that dog down, and they said, isn't that unusual? It marked that dog different from the other ones. Well, the real owner of that dog started looking for him. And he put out a thing, and they said, well, somebody's got one down there. Well, anyway, he found out that they had found a dog, and he's come over to look for it. And the man told his sons, they said, let's get this dog down. And they pulled those 3 white hairs out of that dog's tail. So when the owner got there, they said, yeah, he said, well, I'm looking for a dog I lost here not long ago. And they said, well, here he is. And the dog licked his hands, and he patted him on the head and everything. And they said, and he said, well, I think it's my dog. I believe that's my dog. And they said, but didn't you say that your dog had 3 hairs in the tail? White hairs in the tail? And he said, yeah, I did. And they said, well, this one don't. And the guy left, and they kept his dog. You know what that is? That's crooked. And they said them children lost all confidence in their daddy from then on because they saw their daddy cheat that man. You might not realize it. Your kids watch how you deal with people. They watch how you talk to people. They watch every move you make when you do underhanded, crooked deals or lie to your family or to mama. They know when daddy's not setting a good example. Number 3. You know what a man's main job to do is? Being sure his family will all be in heaven. I heard Brother Joe was preaching the other night, went down there and heard him, and he wasn't preaching on Father's Day, but he just told this story. And boy, it reminded me of me because I have 3 daughters. And he said he had a son and a daughter, and he said his daughter, I might not have it exactly right, but the gist of the story was, he said his daughter, he wasn't sure of his daughter's salvation. Maybe you're a man here this morning, and you've got a daughter, and you're not positive she's saved. And he said he used to get down every night and say, Lord, make sure she's saved. Lord, I want to be sure. God, that's my daughter. I don't want my daughter to wind up in hell. You hear all these stories about preachers' kids and getting wild and crazy and rebellious. He said, God, I don't want to lose one of my kids. I want my kids to go to heaven. I want them to wind up in heaven. God, please touch my daughter. Touch my daughter. And he said one night, he was off preaching somewhere, and he said like 11 o'clock at night, he's in a motel, and the phone rang. And he said it was his wife back home. She said, honey, we've got a problem here at home. He said, what's up? And he named his daughter. I forgot what her name was. He said she's wanting to get saved. She's wanting to make sure of it. And she wants her daddy. He said, I think he said 3 or 4 hour drive. And he's tired. It's 11 o'clock at night. And he said, well, can't you talk to her? She said, she wants you. She wants her daddy right now. He said, I jumped up, put my clothes on, drove 4 hours up to my house. And he said, I got there, and there was my little daughter under conviction. And God was dealing with her heart. Ladies and gentlemen, when that time comes, that is the most important day of a person's life. Are you listening to me? Hey, I've seen people say, oh, she made the cheerleading squad. Oh, she graduated. That might be okay sometimes. But I'm telling you something, brother, the greatest day in a boy or girl's life is when they really have God get a hold of their heart and get born again, get saved by the grace of God. And Joe led his daughter to the Lord, and now she's going to law school and becoming a Christian lawyer. And hell, good luck with that. And I'm telling you something, brother, she's going to serve God and do right. And I'm telling you this morning, ladies and gentlemen, being sure your family will all be in heaven is the greatest thing you can possibly do. I read about a man who was a leader in a church, big shot in a church, one of the main men of the church. And he said they had an evangelist come in and preach revival, and he preached 3 or 4 nights, and he'd give the invitation, come to the altar, come to the altar. And one night he got up, and he said, I want all the Christian men to come up here and pray, and if you need to get saved, come up here and pray. And his little boy's name is Johnny. I think he was 11 years old. He said he was 11 years old, and he said, I seen Daddy go, so when Daddy got out, I got out. And I started going down the altar. He said, I felt God calling me and speaking to my heart. And his daddy turned around and he said, Johnny, you go back and sit down. You're too young. And he said, I was always taught to respect my daddy and do what he said, so I turned around and went back and took my seat. And he said 22 years of his life went by before he felt like that again. And when he was 33, the Spirit of God spoke to his heart again, and he come and got saved, and he told his family, he said, we wasted 22 years of my life that I could have been serving God because my daddy told me to go back and sit down. There's a daddy that had no spiritual discernment. There's a daddy that had no spiritual sense whatsoever. And I understand little kids sometimes don't. I got it. But he said, you know what he said? He said, I understood it better when I was 11 years old and more clear, and my faith was more in God than I did when I was 33. That's why Jesus said, suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not. That's why a childlike faith. He didn't tell a 33-year-old to come like an 11-year-old. He said 11-year-old ought to come like as a child, the other way around. He said 33-year-old, you come like a child. Child, you come like a child. And I'm telling you this morning, you be sure your family is saved. I always asked the Lord, I said, I want to lead all 3 of my girls to the Lord, and I want to baptize all 3 of them. I want to marry all 3 of them. One of them's not married yet. And I said, Lord, if you'll let me do that, I'd sure appreciate it. And I prayed for him. And I said, Lord, let me do that. Well, sure enough, I think Carrie was 6 or 7. Was you 7? 7. And I always told people said, Brother Danny, how do you know when a kid's ready to get saved? And I said, well, you don't push it on. You don't just push them out, get saved. You can push a 5, 6-year-old, into anything. And I set them down when they was little, and I said, now, honey, one of these days, you're going to feel like the need you want to get saved. And when that happens, you come and tell me. Sure enough, she come one night and said, Daddy, I want to get saved. I said, honey, are you sure you're ready to do this? You understand? I did that with all 3 of them. And, buddy, I'm telling you, listen, girls, listen, everybody, I would rather them girls over there know God and know it's real and know Jesus Christ and their faith be in Him and will all be in heaven forever and ever and ever than I would them to have everything this world's got to offer times 1,000. And I mean that with all my heart. I can't believe people, all they do is want to push their kids to Hollywood or push their kids to be success in this world. There's nothing wrong with making a good, honest living, but I'm telling you, your main job is to make sure them kids are going to be in heaven one of these days. Make sure! Daddy, make sure! Daddy, make sure! Don't let them come in and see you laying around, won't even get up, won't serve God, watching dirty stuff on that internet, filling your mind with filth and trash and sewage, and not even have a spiritual bone in your body. Never read the Bible, never pray, never be an example to them. Take your kids and say, by God's grace, me and my house going to serve the Lord. Now there's stories in the Bible. The prodigal son in Luke chapter 15, that old boy run away from home. He was mean as the devil, wasted everything he had, wasted his inheritance, wasted all of that. And you know what he said one day? One day he woke up and he said, you know what? I'm going back to my father's house. Daddy's got servants living better than I am. I'm going to go back over there and live with my daddy. And so he come home, old hog slop all over him. That's a picture of sin, this world, and old junk. He'd been eating corn husks, and he come back, and you know what the father did? The father went out. Listen to me. Father went out, hugged his neck, and you read Luke chapter 15 and see what that daddy said. He said, I can rejoice. Kill the fatted calf. Throw the steaks on the grill, boys. Bring out the best robe. Put the ring on his finger. He said, we're rejoicing. He said, my son was uneducated and now has his degree. No, that ain't what he said. That father did not say, my son was sorry good for nothing and now he's got muscles and he's good looking and they put him on the front of a magazine. No! He did not say, my son went off and became successful and now he's got a lot of money. He said, my son was lost and now he's found. He said, we're going to rejoice about the right thing. What? Hey, people, hey, there's nothing wrong with jumping up and down when your son hits a home run. I would too. If I had a son and he hit a home run, I'd jump up and down too. That ain't wrong. But I'm telling you, we rejoice about the wrong thing. We put the emphasis on the wrong thing. The greatest day in a kid's life when they get saved and live for God. And if your kids are saved, you got a kid in here this morning that likes to go to church and serve God, you ought to be shouting your head off every day of your life because that is the greatest thing that a father can do for them. I'll tell you another story in the Bible. The rich man. The rich man in hell. In hell, people. And he died. He was rich, but he went to hell. And in hell, he was screaming. And he looked across that great gulf. You better make sure you're saved, buddy. He looked across that great gulf and saw Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. And he said, Father Abraham, send Lazarus over here and put a drop of water on my tongue. And he said, you know, we can't do that. We can't go over there. You can't come over here. And all that. And I want you to notice what that man said. He said, Father, if I can't get out and there ain't no hope for me, send somebody to my father's house. His daddy was lost. He said, I have 5 brothers. Somebody go knock on their door. Somebody take a bus. Somebody get a handful of tracts and go see my brothers, lest they come to this place of torment. I heard a preacher preach on that one time, and I've never forgot it. And the title of his sermon was, 1 in hell and 5 on the way. That man had 6 boys that was lost. 1 in hell and 5 on the way. You know what's wrong with us here in America? We got our priorities way off, misplaced. We worship education. I'm not against it. We worship money. I'm not against that. But I'm telling you, the day's going to come when you better make sure your kids understand what's the most important thing is where you're going to be on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Not just here for 80 years. You better hear me. He said, I got 5 brothers. I'm in hell already. Listen, that daddy thought he had a millionaire son and he was a success, but he was a flop. Because his son went to hell. I read the story of a fine Scottish Christian man, dignified man. He had a boy who was smart, educated, well-loved. Everybody knew him. And his boy got in trouble from embezzlement, stole money. And they took him to court. And there was that fine Christian man sitting over here in the courtroom while they tried his son, his boy that he had raised up all his life, his boy that he'd seen since he was that high grow up, and now he's grown on trial. And that man stood. They said that guy, the judge, come out with the sentence from the the verdict. And he said, will the defendant please rise? And that boy stood up like this. And he started reading off his sentence. And they said that Christian man stood over here in the crowd, stood as they sentenced his boy. His head down, his shoulders slumped. And he stood there and listened as that judge sentenced his boy in shame. You know, I don't know if it'll be like that or not. I'm just wondering, what if it's like that when we get someday to the great white throne judgment and we're back? You know, we won't be there at the judgment, but we'll be there but not being judged. We stand before the great white throne, and some boy stands before God, and the angel reads his record, and God sentences him to the lake of fire. There'll be a daddy standing over here saying, my boy. My boy. The greatest thing you can do for your son is live right, serve God, and make sure that boy's saved. Make sure. The greatest thing any daddy could do is to see his family in heaven one day. Let's stand, bow our heads for prayer. Heads bowed. Eyes are closed. Nobody's moving. Nobody's talking.